In death, there are no accidents, no coincidences, no mishaps, and no escapes. What you have to realize is that we're all just a mouse that a cat has by the tail. Every single move we make, from the mundane to the monumental, the red light that we stop at or run, the people we have sex with or won't with us, the airplanes that we ride or walk out of. It's all part of death's sadistic design, leading to the grave.
Design. Does that mean if you figure out the design, you can cheat death?
Alex, you've already done that by walking off the plane. Your friend's departure shows that death has a new design for all of you. Now you have to figure out how and when it's coming back at you. Play your hunch, Alex, if you think you can get away with it. But remember, the risk of cheating the plan, of disrespecting the design, could incite a fury that could terrorize even the Grim Reaper. And you don't even want to fuck with that, Mac Daddy.
Welcome once again to Success to Series, the Failure to Franchise spinoff dedicated to some of Hollywood's hits, winners, and triumphs. This is Trev.
And I'm Chris.
Yeah. Oh, no witty pun at Success to Series. That's a Failure to Franchise trademark, huh?
Yeah, it really is. I got to keep my bits where they lie. You know, I got to be consistent.
I get it, man. This is a different show. And we haven't done one of these in a while. We were just talking before we started recording. It's been over a year since we've done one of these. February 2023 was the last time we were like, you know what? Let's not talk about failure. Let's talk about success. But I think we had a rough year this year. A lot of really bad movies. You know, we talked last time too about how we went through all of October and didn't really talk about horror. So I was like an addict. You know, I was like jonesing over here a little bit. And I think for like all these reasons, it felt like it was a time to dust off our spin-off series, which you and I do really enjoy doing because it gives us a different vibe, a chance to just kind of like shoot the shit a little bit more about something we genuinely like and know we like going in. It's not a mystery. Yeah. And that is Success to Series, where as this is a podcast devoted to movies that are meant to start franchises and for whatever reason don't, which is what we dissect every other week. We thought a while ago that it would be fun to look at some of the more successful series that you and I both like to talk about what does make a great franchise? Why did these take off when all the other movies we looked at didn't? So it's kind of like, you know, what are the models, the formulas that do work? And that way you can kind of compare, you know, it's like I always say, you don't really know what a good movie is unless you're willing to watch a bad movie. So it's kind of like that, right? We should talk about some of the successes to put all the failures we look at in better context.
Yeah, we've looked at the Underworld franchise, the James Bond franchise, Rocky franchise, and my personal favorite horror movie franchise, Saw. Yes. We looked at that too. So it's going to be interesting to actually talk about the Final Destination movies in a little bit of comparison of why I like the Saw movies too. They almost go part and parcel with a lot of things that I enjoy about this brand of horror. So, where do we start? I guess we should maybe talk, listeners, I guess newcomers to this, we are way more loosey-goosey on Success to Series than we are Failure to Franchise. Usually we go through the whole history, we do this, we do that, we do factoids, but we really kind of structure F2F quite well. But this one is a little bit, it's just going to kind of come out of us. You know,
well, let's just, you know what? Yeah. I mean, that's true. We just decided to sit down and say, hey, let's just talk for like an hour, maybe a little over an hour about one of our favorite horror franchises, Final Destination. What does that mean to us? We'll figure it out together. But I will say, maybe we should just start by quickly defining what this series is, like even just the general concept, because who knows? Maybe there's at least one person listening who doesn't really know what Final Destination is, but they love us. And they're like Trev and Chris completists. And they're like, I got to listen to this episode, but I don't know what Final Destination is. So maybe, Chris, do you want to just give like a basic elevator pitch of what this franchise is all about?
For sure. In the typical slasher franchise, usually it's a guy with a hook or a guy with a knife and they're or a monster or a ghoul or baddie that's going after our young people. But Final Destination kind of changed that and decided to make the villain Death incarnate. So kind of like the idea of death, the idea of fate, about how death is always coming for you and can you avoid it? So it's a fundamentally cynical franchise, I would say,
Hmm.
which is part of the fun, because really nobody is safe. And especially how they all start out, like you get usually the main character of the film has a premonition to start the movie. Like basically a huge disaster usually opens up these films, and then it flashes and oh my God, that was just a premonition of the main character being like, holy shit, I just saw everybody die around me. And they have to now struggle to, I guess, get their point across to everybody around them saying, hey, we can't do this. We got to get off the road. We got to get off the plane. We can't go down this roller coaster. We can't, we got to get out of the stadium. Before disaster strikes. And then basically the tragedy and disaster does start to happen the exact way the premonition said in the first place. However, usually the main character does survive. So
Hmm.
then it becomes this kind of mystery of like, how do we avoid death? How, like, what is this? Certain rules are thrown at in every entry, which is kind of fun. So to let the franchise grow and have some fun. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's pretty good. Like, it's also it gets really extravagant and gruesome.
Yeah,
To go
yeah. I
back to
mean,
kind
like,
of my
yeah.
Saw comparison.
So like I said, the idea is like, our main character and a group of others, because of his premonition, has escaped their initial, what was meant to be their death. And
Mhm.
now they are typically dying in the order they were meant to die in the disaster. So you might hear that and think, wow, geez, that does sound maybe interesting for like one movie. How does that, live on for five movies and more to come? We'll talk about
Yeah,
that in a little bit. And of course, there are additions to the mythology as we go along, but as you said, it becomes this kind of like pitch black humor, Grand Guignol showcase of like Rube Goldbergian death sequences that are very, very unique to like the horror franchise. I think. I mean, like as you said, one of the things I guess we can just say it right off the bat. You've already alluded to this. One of the reasons I think this franchise is just so popular and so singular is it is just so unique. It's so unique that like the slasher craze of the 80s was kind of defined by all these movies that felt like they were always ripping each other off, right? And they all
hmm
felt very, very similar. And one thing about Final Destination, I think I mentioned this in the previous episode when we said we were going to do this episode, is that Final Destination has kind of never been ripped off and no one's really tried to replicate it
totally.
because it's just such a unique concept that if you did that, it just would be like, why is this not just a Final Destination movie? Like, how do you rip this off without just seeming like a rip off? Whereas with slashers, you can go, well, okay, but our slasher has a different mask and a slightly different origin and it's a different holiday, right? But Final Destination came up with this kind of like bulletproof concept. Now, to be fair, let me just say this right off the bat so I don't forget. There is actually a great, still to this day, underappreciated 1984 horror film called Soul Survivor,
Mm.
written and directed by Tom Eberhart, who like horror fanatics would probably know, also the guy who also did Night of the Comet. And Soul Survivor is this really great, it's like dread-filled movie about a woman who is the sole survivor of an airplane crash. After she survives, she feels lucky. She feels a little bit of survivor syndrome, but she's trying to get through that, and she feels, still lucky she survived. But she starts having these like strange like visions, like these people are appearing to her, just standing off in the distance and kind of like staring at her. But then they
hmm
keep seeming to like get closer and closer, and they just look very like pale, and you start to get, and she ultimately strikes up this like relationship with this psychic, and the psychic essentially is telling her like, I think this is like death coming for you. You were supposed to die in that crash with everyone else.
hmm
So in the years since, there's been a lot of discussion about how, we'll talk about the people behind Final Destination. There's been a lot of talk about, did they actually watch this movie and kind of get the idea there? They have denied it. I kind of believe them. I think the movies are different enough, but I wanted to bring it up because I do think if people like Final Destination, they should go watch Soul Survivor. Like I said,
Cool.
it's more like it is more dread filled and it's not as like over the top, goofy fun like the Final Destination movies are. But it's kind of
Mhm.
cool to see an earlier take on the concept. Now, with that out of the way, as I said, since the Final Destination franchise has taken off, though, it's just its own thing. You know, it's like
Mhm.
no one's trying to rip it off, and like that's you just can't. It's so singular.
It's funny because to this day, especially, I don't even want to say age group. It kind of crosses generational lines, this franchise, especially because it's been around since, I mean, what is it, 2000? So 24 years it's been going, and the next one comes out next year, 2025. What is it called? What are they? Final Fantasy, or it's Final Fantasy. I can't stop thinking about Final Fantasy, the
I
Spirits
know. Ever
Within.
since we did that episode,
Jeez.
every day Chris texts me like, "Hey, man, Final Fantasy Spirits Within, wasn't that great?" And I'm like, "Chris, no, get over it."
You know what it is?
Sending
I
me
gotta
the
actually.
sending me the Maxim screenshots of Aki in her bikini all the time.
I was just about to say I have to take that poster off my wall, and maybe I'll stop thinking about her.
Mhm.
But Final Destination Bloodlines is coming out
Yes.
next year. But to this day, when I talk to people and about freak accidents, stuff like
Mhm.
that, or the avoidance of such things, like 9 times out of 10, people will tell me, oh, just like Final Destination.
Yeah.
It's like it's become so part of the culture
Yes.
that and it's funny because these movies like sort of blend together. Like even before this episode, me and Trev were talking about what's our favorite kill and what are we or our favorite death, sorry, and what are we going to talk about on the podcast, and they sort of all blend in some way, shape, or form, so it becomes like this overarching umbrella metaphor or analogy to say, hey, if you narrowly avoided getting maimed or killed, dude, you should be in a Final Destination movie every
Yeah.
single time. It's quite wild that you're so right. That other horror franchises aren't as applicable. That's, I guess, what it is. A Final Destination movie, I think the scary part about it, and I think where the real horror aspect of it is, it's literally something that can happen. Obviously they get extravagant, as I said before, like, and we're going to talk about a few of them, but at the bare bones of it, it could be like slipping on your bathroom floor after a shower and smacking your
Mhm.
head. And I think that is where the terror lives. And speaking for myself, I mean, Trev knows this, and maybe our listeners do too, but I'm quite neurotic.
Mhm.
My fiance knows this particularly well, but I am somebody that probably thinks about being maimed or dying in the worst way, like maybe a little bit too often, more than I should, especially on a healthy level. So I'm very aware. I say to my friends all the time that, like, knock on wood, I'm like, I'm not a guy to, to slip on the ice and hit his head. Like I'm too aware. Like I'm too aware of all that stuff. One of my biggest fears, and this is going to sound really stupid out of context, but in context of Final Destination, Trev, it's been like a decades long fear of opening up cupboards above you,
Yeah.
reaching down to grab a knife or fork, and then putting your bringing your head back up at the same velocity and smacking my head on the corner of an open cupboard, and then becoming a vegetable.
Yeah.
Is
No,
that
I
weird?
mean, I don't think it is weird because like I wouldn't call it like a overall encompassing fear that keeps me awake at night or like is
Mhm.
overwhelming. But how many times you hear about people who are just like alone in a hotel room and slip and hit their head and just get a
Yep,
head injury, and because no one was with them, they just go to sleep and just pass away. Like the
absolutely.
the Bob Saget's just that kind of story is terrifying to me because you just
Hmm.
think about that. I think so. I wanted to you as you were mentioning that I said this raises a good question, and the question, of course, that centers on this franchise is Final Destination scary? And that's actually a unique and interesting conversation because I wouldn't say it's scary in the way most other big horror franchises are, right? It doesn't have jump scares.
Hmm.
It's not the same kind of thrilling scare. This is a franchise that's built entirely on anxiety. But as you just said, it is a franchise that is reminding us, and I have like a whole thesis to get into later about this, not to get too academic about Final Destination, but it is a franchise that is reminding us of how close we always are to death. Like I'll tell
Yes.
you a story. A few
Yes.
weeks ago, Chris, in my small little apartment here in Ohio, Liz, my wife, was in the office working on something, and I was out in the living room, and I think I just finished dinner. I put the plates in the sink and everything, and I was walking back to the living room, and we have a little blanket that hangs over the couch, and I've probably walked by that blanket, I don't know, roughly 8,000 times or something. And this one time, I accidentally tripped on it. And I tripped on it so bad that it sent me like I went stumbling into the living room, all the way across the living room. I had to put out my arms. I put out my arms and slammed into our TV stand and like knocked
Jesus.
the TV down. Like the lamp fell over. Liz heard it and thought the cats like knocked over something, obviously, and came running in. And I just like, it was like very embarrassing, obviously. You're always embarrassed when something like that happens.
Hmm.
But there's also just a moment, a split second where you go, that could have been so much worse. Like one like more inch off, and if I hadn't got my arms up in time, instead of like catching like the stand and knocking the TV down, I could have
Yep.
just hit my head on the edge of the TV or on the edge of the stand, and that would be game over for me, you know. And that kind of stuff happens to us all the time. I was gonna say when you said like, oh, you're not the kind of person who slips on ice because you're so like ready for it. Don't you think the general irony is it's those are the people who end up having some kind of freak accident, and the people who
Oh,
are like blissfully unaware of things like this just like skate through life with nothing ever happening, you know?
you
But
know why those blissfully ignorant people get past those injuries and stuff is because it's like a toddler. Okay,
yeah.
you know how toddlers like run around because they have no concept of death. They have no
Mhm.
concept of being injured. So when they fall, they ragdoll, right?
Yeah.
And everybody will tell you if you fall, you should ragdoll. Like when you fell, you threw your arms out. Technically, not supposed to do that because you could break your
I
arms,
know.
right?
Yeah.
It's kind
Yeah.
of like when I used to rollerblade as a kid. You know, you wear wrist pads, wrist
Yep.
guards, sorry. And I was always like taught because I was scared if you put your hands down, you can cut your wrist on like the cement if you fall, right? So those wrist guards are there. And it's like there's so many little things. You're so right that we're one second away from something happening. Like every time I get out of my shower, I have an edged tile tub right beside my shower. I'm telling you, Trev, I think about it probably every couple days, being like, okay, watch your step.
Yeah.
Like if I smack that thing, hopefully my phone's around, so maybe I can, let Siri do something. But dude, uh, that's wild. First of all, back to my Matrix theory that I always talk about on this podcast. That happened to you recently when we were coming up to this episode, right?
There were like after that even there was a couple like other things that happened and I like and like so much on a much smaller scale, right? But like things that like could have been the beginning of some escalation, and I did because Liz and I were going through this whole franchise, and like that started to become a joke where I'm like, I think the universe is trying to kill us because we're watching Final Destination. But that's the
Yeah.
thing is it makes you realize how all these small moments, it's like when it's in your mind you realize that that's happening to us just all the time, right?
Yeah.
And this is that butterfly effect thing where look, as someone, I've been in a serious car accident and was quite injured from it.
Hmm.
And there's definitely a part of me that still to this day will think about, like, so that was like driving back from an airport, and I'll just think to myself, if I had just stopped in that airport to like tie my shoes or something, and if
Hmm.
we had been delayed just that 15 seconds, this accident might not have happened and my arm might not have been all torn up. I wouldn't have to get the skin graft surgery. But at the same time, there's also the element of like, put you the other way, if I had just maybe been sitting in a slightly different spot in the car, I might have like
Totally.
been killed instead of just had my arm injured. So it's just like that's our constant life. And it's like the kind of thing where you can't think about it, or you can't let that be your life. But this is the reason Final Destination works, is because it does play on that anxiety. And that like I said, that kind of goes, I guess I'll just say the thesis statement now so I can get it out of the way,
Sure.
because this is a series that has a pretty big tonal shift from the first movie into the sequels. And I
Mhm.
think I know why that tonal shift happened, beyond the fact of like, just what can you do with the concept to keep it going,
Can
right?
I, before you say the theory, can I just kind of guess and kind of add to it a little bit of like what
For
I
sure.
think?
Yeah.
I said it kind of earlier. It's very cynical, this whole idea, and I think there's this great quote by some author that was writing about, what's his name, Ian Conrick. He's a film studies scholar, and he talked about how these films are death games, contraptions, or puzzles in which there are only losers, and I
Mhm.
and I think that quote really stuck with me because if these movies don't brighten up or lighten up or get some silly, kooky characters, especially in the second movie, um, it would be a slog. And I think it would really fuck with your head that you'd leave sort of depressed. Is that kind of where you're going with?
It kind of, but I there's I, it that kind of speaks to like the overall vibe of the franchise, right? Because ultimately, yes, it is a movie that's reminding you of how close you are to death, but it's a movie that also needs you to have fun with the idea, right? And kind of laugh it
Mm-hmm.
off. But I think like that shift is more about what happens in between the release of part one and two. So you mentioned part one comes out in 2000, right? And then part two comes out in 2003. Chris, what gigantic event happened in American history between 2000 and 2003?
Oh yeah, you're so right. 9/11.
Nine
Yeah.
11 happens, right?
Yeah,
And
you're
like, so
right.
the first movie is predicated on a plane crash, right? So, first of all,
Hmm.
that might not have happened if it had come out like in the wake. If this is a movie that had been delayed a little bit, it might have been like, if it was supposed to come out around 9/11, obviously it would have been shelved for a while and been like, maybe just put straight to video or something later or
Yeah, yeah.
whatever. So,
Yeah.
like, putting that aside, right? Putting aside the fact the first one is about a plane crash. And I do want to talk a little bit more about the origins of the first film. We'll come back to that. Like I said, loosey goosey here, but
Yeah, yeah.
that first film is the one that has the most serious tone of any of them, right? It's still got humor, but it's taking itself pretty seriously, and it's got this
Hmm.
kind of just more like like I said, dread-filled supernatural like overwhelming anxiety feel to it than the others. And then 9/11 happens. And I think what was really interesting about Final Destination 2000 and why it was such a big hit was it was just what the horror franchise needed at the time, coming off of the entire late 90s wave of Scream clones. Like
Hmm. Hmm.
Scream was this thing that the horror franchise needed, right? And then because the slasher genre had died in the mid to late 80s, and then horror was kind of like floundering. Not to say there weren't good horror movies in the early 90s, but it was floundering a little bit, and they were trying to find a way. What's going to be the next big thing? And then Scream hits and we get this wave of Scream wannabes, some of which are fun, but most of which are very much lesser Scream, even including the Scream sequels, right?
Yeah.
And it's just this like wave of teenage slashers. All the posters look the same with the line of heads. They're increasingly bloodless as the MPA starts like tamping down. I mean, if anyone doesn't want to believe me, like this happens in waves too. People need to remember how bloody Scream is compared to Scream 3,
Big time.
right?
And
Just like,
vicious. And it's
yeah,
vicious.
yeah, yeah,
The Ghostface is a vicious killer.
yeah.
It is like
So
he's very clumsy and he's very aggressive. It's a very aggressive movie.
So we're coming off of that, right? And it's just like that wave now is dying down too, right? We've had I know you did last summer's, your urban legends, your Valentines. We're ready to move on to something else.
Hmm.
And there was at least a moment in the like pre-production, like conception of Final Destination, where I know at one time it was floated that this should be about like a masked killer coming after these people. I believe the idea was that he'll be like the relative of someone who did die in the plane crash, and he's upset that these people got off. Right? That was at
Hmm.
least one idea that they talked about for a while, and thankfully Morgan and Wong and Reddick kind of stuck to their guns and said, "No, I actually think this would be better if it's just death."
Hmm.
And what a great idea, right? But so that it's just like, okay, we came through, we survived, no pun intended, this like wave of Scream clones, and now here's what looks to be a slasher film, but with a supernatural element that is just so unique and so unseen before, right? And then 9/11 happens. And I think that completely changes the trajectory because, and I can speak to this because I was 20 when 9/11 happened. I was about to turn 21 and just a few days later. And the 90s were a really kind of prosperous, like mostly calm. And again, I'm definitely talking from a place of middle class white privilege, right? But the 90s were known for being like very like economically like comfortable for most of America.
Hmm.
Clinton was president. Our biggest like concerns were whether the president got a blowjob or not. And there was this kind of like obviously, as you can see from like the Woodstock 99 documentary and everything, there was this kind of like sieging rage that was building there. But as in general, we kind of came out of the 90s very, very just like confident. And America hadn't been attacked on like home soil like since Pearl Harbor, right? America had just become very, very complacent. If America was involved in wars like in the last couple decades before that, they were like minor wars and brief skirmishes, and we were just kind of sent over and like just barely involved, right? Something like a Desert Storm or something.
Right.
And then 9/11 happens, and everyone fucking obviously freaks out because it's such a shock to the system of like, I remember this feeling too of like, oh my God, we're not invulnerable. America is
Mhm.
like very, very vulnerable. And beyond that, like in the 90s, again, the reason those Scream clones probably worked is because if you had any thought of like, I might just die randomly, it was probably because you were thinking, well, yeah, it would be from like someone murdering me, right? Like Columbine happens in the 90s. So we're starting to get the sense of school shooters. But I think young people in general coming out of the 90s weren't thinking about the absurdity of death and the randomness of death and just the
Yeah.
stupid little things that could kill you. And then 9/11 reminds you, oh, you could just get on the wrong plane with like the wrong people. And then this happens.
Hmm.
And suddenly, all of like the youth of America, I mean all of America obviously, but especially the youth, like I think are introduced to like a new idea of death in general. Just thinking about how like,
There's like
oh
a
my,
supreme vulnerability at any
yes.
moment.
We felt just I know I'm just speaking about America, but and this is like a a globally popular franchise. But I mean 9/11 obviously affected the world too.
Sure.
A lot of other countries obviously had been dealing with this forever, right? I remember even those stories and those like articles at the time about like this is super tragic, but you have to remember like there's so many countries in Europe that have these terrorist attacks all the time.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
like it was just such a new idea to America, but it was a new idea to us. Like suddenly this idea of like how close death is it all the time and how random it is. And so Final Destination, suddenly the sequels have like a kind of more like impact to them, more power. And I think that's why the sequels kind of like tamp in even more on like the Rube Goldbergian nature of it and going like
Mhm.
super over the top with the death sequences because now it is playing on this suddenly new introduced idea to people of like, oh yeah, I could die at any moment, not just from someone murdering me, but from something as stupid as like, like I said, getting on the wrong plane. Not that that's not stupid, but I mean like,
Sure. Sure.
just something like plugging in the wrong appliance and not realizing the cord is frayed and suddenly it blows up in my face. And like that's just I maybe I'm
I
wrong. It just
no, no,
feels
no.
like I
I'm
think 9/11 I think 9/11 gave people a new relationship with how afraid they were of death, and this franchise was like properly suited to come along and both exploit that, but then as you said, also act as like a salve against it to be like, yes, but let's also be silly about it and let's have
Mhm.
the comforting nature of it come from being so over the top that we can kind of like laugh because that's what a horror ultimately is too, right? It's a chance for us to confront death and
Yeah.
kind of like conquer death vicariously through the characters and just get some sense of like relief and comfort from it. So yeah, I don't know if that made any sense, anything I just
No,
said, but
no, it does. So, as longtime listeners know, I'm Canadian.
mhm.
So, sometimes me and Trev have a little difference of opinion, but purely because of how stark the differences actually are in America and Canada. But I will say the 9/11, uh, um, I guess, fuse starter of all
Yeah,
of this is real. And
yeah,
I think because I know other countries go through stuff as well, but I think what it was the veil fell on the largest superpower on planet Earth that was absolutely invulnerable. It was
yes,
fucking Superman. Fucking America is Superman. And then all
yeah,
of a sudden, somebody threw a big fucking kryptonite rock at his forehead
yeah.
and crumbled him, really. And I mean, me and my friends, not to get off on too much of a tangent here, but that's kind of the way of success to series. And I'm sure we'll brighten up a little later talking about the actual movies. But me and my friends talk about, and this isn't going to be, monumental, and I'm not, a genius for saying this, but 9/11 really is the reason why we're at where we are today. And I think like most things in the world, negatively or positively, but mostly negatively, I think really stem from that moment in time.
Hmm.
And it's very hard to think of a more important worldwide event that changed the trajectory of art, of film, of what we're talking about now, of our day-to-day security, our vulnerability, our trust of our neighbors, our trust of our family, our backs up against the wall, anxieties, social media addiction, like truly just need to know what's going on in the world at all times. I think that's what really set everything off on this fucking weird, wild, kind of shitty path. Um, Having said that, Final Destination, you know, kind of took the ball and ran with it. And like you said, it struck a chord with people on a worldwide audience
Yeah.
and kept it going. Again, like it's 24 years later and it's still in the people's
Well,
minds, right? So,
because the key word you just said, and it ties back to something you said earlier too, is you said vulnerability, and you mentioned earlier the thing about like toddlers not knowing that they're in danger, right? And
mhm.
that's ultimately, I was not surprisingly, I was long-winded. I know that's another trademark of mine, but like the ultimate idea I was trying to get at there is there's a perceived invulnerability and immortality of youth, right? When you're young,
Yes.
you just spend less time thinking about all the things that could happen to you. You spend less time thinking about death. You're young. You're not interested in it, right? You are putting it out of mind. And 9/11 for I think an entire generation was the shock to the system of saying, "Hey, you can't ignore that. Like it's death is potentially right around the corner in like a major way, a crazy way. It's we are not invulnerable. We are not immortal, right? So this
Hmm.
franchise was able to like say, yeah, exactly. So now let's like really lean into it. And in fact, there are like three direct 9/11 references in Final Destination 3, right? It is like the franchise ultimately like
It
was willing
knows.
to like to bring that up, and just say like, yeah, like this is the way it is. Like there are freak accidents all the time. You are this close to death at every moment of your waking life. And so that's what this franchise is going to exploit. But like you said, if you just exploited that, and if the entire franchise, and this is what I was trying to get at, is like why the franchise had to change, and you alluded to this too. I think if we had five films that had the same tone of the first one, and again, not that the first one is like so dour, but it's
Hmm.
more serious. If we had five just like that, I don't know that the franchise would be as successful. I don't know that we would have got to five. I think it was very, very important for part two to already be like, all right, man, like we struck gold with this concept, but now we really got to like up the insanity and the ridiculousness of this. We got to have some fun with it, or else it's just going to be like a slog to watch these young people dying in these like horribly tragic, like ironic, dumb ways, right? So instead, let's make them so dumb that we can laugh at them. Let's Darwin award it up. And that's where the franchise, I think, to me, like I like the first one a lot. We'll rank them later, but I do think that was a very, very smart move to say, let's make this a really fun, goofy, almost like not even almost like darkly comedic series
Oh yeah.
about the ridiculousness of death. Because if we're all, that's the one thing that unites us, right? We're all gonna die. So let's just like let's laugh at it if we can. Even the young who are just for the first
Yeah.
time realizing that it's gonna happen to them.
Yeah, basically laugh in death's face, right? And say fuck you, and we're gonna,
Mhm.
be here as long as we can.
And can
Um,
you try to defeat it? And it's interesting that this series ultimately has like a very, very cynical sense of that.
yeah.
It was interesting to me, kind of, not to get too far ahead, but the only two, like at this time, right? Who knows what's going to happen in future films or if they'll kind of come back to anything. At this time, the only two survivors of this franchise, as far as we know, are the two heroes from Final Destination 2. That is the only movie that ends with like the heroes surviving and they don't come back in like a sequel to be killed. Like that's like, oh, they got away with it. And like every other Final Destination movie has like a twist ending where you're like you think your heroes are fine. It's like no, actually you just can't beat this. So it is cynical, but it manages to be like the most cynical horror franchise, but still the most fun. That's kind of
Oh
crazy,
yeah.
like yeah.
Cynical but consistent. And that's what's cool. Like the consistency of this franchise. Like just to, always, I always like to throw stats at you. You know,
Yeah.
and we always talk about budgets of films and how much they gross, and certain Rotten Tomato scores and where they lie in the cultural zeitgeist. Let me tell you here, all five films that are released, there's one on the way, as we've said, but all five films that are released, they're between 23 and $40 million to make them,
Hmm.
which even by today's standards is like, do they make those anymore? Like, and I know they do, but it's very, very seldom. That budget is very, very small. And these things made worldwide. Well, I guess the total budgets of all five films are $154 million, and they have made almost $700 million worldwide.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I take that bet every single day of my life, right?
We
And
should point out the last two, the only reason those two cost more to make, like it was like they were all riding along like the 25 million budget level,
yep,
and then the final two are 40 million only because they moved to 3D. Like the
correct.
3D technology is what bumped the budget up. Yeah.
So again, to that Saw comparison, from that franchise, these movies are kept at a very moderate budget, and man, they work. And
Mhm.
people know what they're getting out of Final Destination films, and starting from a cynical place but having fun with it is really something that we can all join in on the reindeer games, you know?
Well, it's what makes the franchise fun, right? Like you said, it does become formulaic, and I'm glad that as it goes along, it tries to like, especially with the fifth one, which we'll address later.
Yeah.
It does try to like come up with new wrinkles to the mythology to kind of keep it interesting. But overall, as you said, you know what you're getting into. Now that said, if anyone wants to like criticize the five Final Destination movies for that, that's also true for the Nightmare on Elm Street series, the Halloween
Hmm.
series,
Hmm.
the Friday 13th, which even in like a much bigger way, right? Like all of like that's the criticism against Friday the 13th, right? You know what you're getting. It's just Jason killing people in the woods. And the fun of that is like, okay, yeah, but what are the deaths going to be? And that's true here. And like here, it's like you're not limited by what weapon can Jason use. You are limited only by Well, no, I mean nothing really, right?
Yeah,
Like the sky is
exactly.
the limit here. Like, what are the craziest, dumbest ways you can die? And I'm sure that is probably the joy of making one of these movies and writing one of these movies is just sitting down and like thinking of insane deaths. So we talked about this with Saw, right? How obviously a big part of Saw is coming up with amazing traps. So that's the obvious like parallel here of like, okay, we have to think of like eight great new traps for the Saw movie, and for each Final Destination, you're like, we got to think of four or five insane death sequences, but death sequences that have a lead up to them, a build up that will have the audience on the edge of their seat. They'll have the
Hmm.
audience laughing as they're nervous. Like it's that kind of like that nervous anxiety that makes you laugh. And then like a payoff that is both gruesome because they should be gory, somewhat shocking, but also like the punchline to the joke, right? Like I think most of these deaths when they happen, they're not tragic, right? The movie doesn't wallow in the
No,
tragic nature of them. You're not like
no.
sad to see these one note characters go. Usually, you laugh because it's like it is the people talk all the time about the similarities between horror and comedy and how they're all based on timing. And I think the Final Destination movies, at their best, have this like incredible build up, and the release of the tension is the death itself, and it acts as a punchline. And I've seen a couple of these in the theater with full audiences, and yeah, those death sequences get a huge laugh, get applause. So it must just be so fun to like sit there and think of these. Like I would love to like be on the team that is just contracted with like making Final Destination death sequences.
Two things. One, listeners, you will hear death sequences that I wrote for Trev and Trev wrote for me.
Yeah.
So we actually came up with these as well. So
Yes.
hold your applause for us also. The second thing, remember when I said the worldwide gross was upwards of 700 million? I rounded up, but is this crazy? The worldwide gross is 666 million. So
I know right now it
666.
is. They
Wow,
probably
that's wild.
maybe they shouldn't have even made that sixth movie.
Oh
Like why
no.
ruin this?
Yikes. Well, uh, good luck out there. Anyways, I think that's a great place to start about, well, not to start, we've been talking for a while now, but maybe we should mention the inception of this idea at least.
I
Like,
I definitely do because it's kind of amazing that we've gone this far talking about this franchise that we both love, and we haven't even mentioned yet that it's oddly an offshoot of another franchise I love, which is a really fun piece of trivia about it.
yeah, it's funny because I actually didn't know this.
Yeah.
Until recently, especially doing the research for the franchise. But because I follow Trev on Letterboxd, which you should too, everyone, the links are in the podcast app. Um, I was following his rewatch recently
Hmm.
because, of course, we were getting prepped for this episode, and Trev actually just bought the Blu-ray collection, the one that I bought about a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
It's a nice small. It fits
Love
nicely
it.
in the shelf. It's great.
Love it. Love a
Um,
multi-movie slim pack Blu-ray set.
with a nice case, like a nice
Yeah.
cover art. The cover art is great.
Yeah.
Um, but I rewatched it. I rewatched this franchise in the beginning of this year, but Trev just did. Anyways, I was following his rewatch a little bit, and he had mentioned that this idea is written by Jeffrey Reddick, the guy who
Hmm.
came up with this whole concept. But he originally wrote this as a spec script for an episode of The X-Files, which
Yes.
honestly makes total sense.
Yep.
Total sense.
Yeah. No, you can totally see this being an episode of the X-Files for sure. I want to find that. I wonder if that, I've never really bothered to look. I wonder if that spec script has made its way online.
Right.
Because I want to see, the first movie does have these like kind of two agents who end up like suspecting that Devon Sawa, the lead in the first one,
Mhm.
is like knows more than what he's letting on, and like what they're trying to figure out, like, is he killing these people? And I obviously wonder how much of that is like a further development of that original spec script. Was that Mulder and Scully? But you can
Sure.
you can see how they would fit into the story just right investigating it, right? So I'd love to see like that hour-long version of it and what that looked like. But yeah, X-Files, one of my all-time favorite shows. I mean, like earlier today I was listening to David Duchovny has a podcast now, and he had Gillian Anderson on, and I was so excited to listen to it because it's like revisiting like mom and dad, like the two of them together as they should be. But yeah, it's just it's so cool that and that's I don't even know if that's something that happens as much anymore, where like writers would just write spec scripts for on-air TV shows and try to like kind of sell them to the show.
Mhm.
Back in the day when these shows had 24 episode seasons or whatever, they were more likely to just farm out and say, okay, if any writers have cool ideas for episodes, especially a show like that, which it had its mythology, but it also had just a lot of standalone episodes. And it's like,
Yep.
I don't know, anyone got a cool supernatural concept that Mulder and Scully could investigate this week? And obviously he did, but ultimately they did not end up taking it. But it did, because he submitted to X-Files, it came to the attention of two of the X-Files heavy hitters behind the scenes. And that was Glenn Morgan and James Wong, who were writing partners on the X-Files, kind of like two of the big names of that like writing team. They had done a number of like kind of great episodes. They were kind of like thought of at the at that time as Chris Carter's number two, even though it was two of them, so I guess two
Mhm,
and three,
mhm.
but they were a writing team, and they were getting a lot of like hype for their work on the X-Files, and they were looking to make the move into movies. And it just so happened that at the same time, Reddick had been convinced by a friend at New Line Cinema to take this X-Files script and expand it into a feature idea. And then Morgan and Wong were brought on, and they took that shooting script. They made their own alterations to it. Reddick ends up getting like story credit, but the three of them share screenplay credit altogether. And as I said, I know at one point there, at least for a moment, from what I've heard, there was a brief moment where they considered making it like a masked killer. But thankfully, they decided to just go back to the idea of it being death. But it all just kind of worked together, and it's just cool that even though I wish Mulder and Scully showed up, I would just love it. But it's just cool that it does have that origin at least.
Jeffrey Reddick had said that he read a story about a woman who was on a vacation and her mom called her and said, "Don't take the flight tomorrow. I have a really bad feeling about it." So when the woman switched flights, the plane that was originally supposed to take it crashed. Now,
Mhm.
do you think the story he read was the plot synopsis of that Soul Survivor movie?
No, because that is a movie about a woman who actually survives the plane crash. She's on the plane when it crashes, and she just survives.
Oh, right. Okay. 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 Okay.
But you do hear stories like that all the time, right? Like, geez, even just to go back to my 9/11 comparison, there's that kind
Mm,
of infamous story that, oh, did you know that Jackie Chan was supposed to be filming on the World Trade Center that day and just something got changed and so it didn't happen. It's just you hear this kind of stuff all the time, right?
right.
Like different things about like who wasn't where they might have been and everything. So which obviously, becomes a big, key through line of this franchise, but it is the kind of thing where, especially if you're trying to think of just a unique idea for an X-Files episode, I could see hearing that story and your creative juices flowing. Ew, gross. Sorry.
Okay, we've gone this long and we haven't said his name yet. And I think we should take this moment we're in the middle of the episode. Let's talk about the other aspect to these movies, who actually isn't around for a couple of the movies,
Yeah.
but comes in for a very limited but effective presence in these films. Intimidating, sinister, but also slightly helpful presence. And that's the great Tony Todd is in these films, and the late great, because we just lost him, man, a month ago.
Yeah.
Trev was watching these movies and killed him, obviously, uh, unfortunately. So,
I'm just not gonna say anything. I'm just gonna sit here and hang my head in shame that yes, apparently my rewatch of Final Destination was the final
you did
straw.
it. You
Yeah.
did it. If only we scheduled this rewatch for 5 years from now, we
I
would have
know.
got him in more of these. But again, Tony Todd, he's horror icon, right? Like Candyman. Uh, you can rattle off a bunch more. Like Trev, you're the guy. You're the horror
Well,
guy.
I
But
played Ben in like the remake of Night of the Living Dead. Yeah, he's
right,
in like
right.
the Hatchet films, and he also is in a like classic X-Files episode called Sleepless, where he plays a Vietnam vet who is experimented on by the military, and the experiment they did means he never falls asleep. And so the idea is like, well, of course, wouldn't it be great if a soldier never slept? But then you question like, okay, yes, but what's that soldier's like years later when he just has not been able to sleep at all? Because you know what
Mhm.
it's like when you just don't get sleep for like a day, right? Imagine your entire life like that. One of the great standalone episodes, and I'm pretty that's probably what brought him into this movie because he's just got the one scene in the first one, and very much it's very clear it was like, hey, let's have a horror icon do a fun little cameo. But when you decide to franchise this, what are the individual elements that can kind of be repeated? And they're very, very smart to say, Tony Todd is the mysterious coroner, right? Who for some reason seems to know a lot about this idea of beating death and death coming after you and trying to cheat death again. He's a great, great through line through all of them, even to the point of like you said, he's not in some of them, but like in part three, even though they couldn't find a way to put like Bloodworth, his character, into it, he's the voice of like the amusement park ride, right? So it's
Yeah.
like they knew they had a mascot for the franchise, and it's cool that he got to like kind of keep coming back and his role getting a little bit more expanded each time he appeared.
And it's nice to have that because, like we said before, these horror franchises usually have, a Freddy or a Jason or a Michael Myers. And again, Final Destination has the invisible force of death. And that's
Yes.
kind of hard to put, not that Tony Todd was on the posters for these movies, but at least there is a bit of horror iconography put into these films, even if it is more or less a wink and a nod to the community at large. And I think
Yeah.
that was very clever of them to incorporate him. And do you know if he and I didn't see any producers for Final Destination come out when Tony Todd had passed saying, "Oh yeah, but at least we got his scene for the new one." Did you see any of that? Like, did they mention anything? Like, did he have a part in this Bloodlines movie, or we just don't know yet?
I am pretty sure that he is in that one. Yes, I am pretty
Okay,
sure that he did film his part before because I
cool.
believe they've been done filming it for a while, and from everything I've heard, he will appear. It'll be a posthumous role for him. I know at one time the Saw writers, Dunstan and Melton, they were like gonna write it, and it ended up like not being them. But there was a time where Tony Todd had done some interviews saying that like, yeah, we're getting ready to finally make some new Final Destination movies. There's going to be like two or three of them, and it's gonna like explore the origins of my character.
Mm,
I wonder if that ended up surviving, and if that might be like if that's the case, I worry about that because I wonder if they start that process in Bloodlines, and unfortunately he's passed away now. And also, I don't really feel like we need an origin for that character. I kind of just like him being the mysterious coroner who shows
I
up.
agree.
But
I agree.
yeah, so we'll see. But yeah, if nothing else, I do believe we'll at least get one more Tony Todd performance in that movie next year.
Cool. Well, I hope so. I do. I
It's
hope so.
what's funny too is I was just thinking as we're talking about him, like how his scenes are like one of the most obvious quick indications of that tonal change we talked about from the first movie to the second, because his appearance in the first movie is they go like our main characters go to the coroner's office to see if they can figure out how one of their friends died because they don't believe the official story, and it is a very kind of stereotypical generic looking medical examiner's office as you would expect it to be. And then in the second one, when one of our remaining hero from the first movie, Ellie Larder's character, she's trying to help the new set of kids this is happening to, and she's like, I think I know someone. I think I know someone who has some information about this, and that's how they set him up. And then they go to now his coroner's office is in like a cave inside a cemetery, and you're like, what? It makes like no sense. It's like he's like in this like it's made out of like stone, and it's just like located inside the cemetery, and it's like so like over the top and ridiculous. And you're like, oh, okay, we're like in a new reality now. That's fine. But
Oh, yeah.
but yeah, but like I said, he's just great because you only have to give him a couple scenes in each of these, and he just adds like such a sense of gravitas to it, obviously.
And he doesn't take away from the characters.
No,
It's
and
not
it's
like
not
a
meant
dis
to.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, and that's what I mean. Like it's not a distracting, cameo, which really seems to be the inception of it, again the wink and the nod, but he's there, he serves a purpose, and they found a way to incorporate him later, and again, not taking away from our main characters. Because I wrote this in, I'm not trying to get ahead of anything, but I wrote this down on one of my Final Destination reviews on Letterboxd, and I said, in order to make a good Final Destination movie, you need an extravagant opener, an attractive slash likable cast, simplistic accidents leading to over-the-top deaths, and a play on the internal rules. And I think that play on the internal rules is really propped up by Tony Todd's character, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, because he's the character who keeps explaining the rules to our characters, right? Like
It's
he's the
nice.
one who
Yeah.
kind of finally like verbalizes what is happening to them in the first one. He provides some additional information in part two, and then even by the time you get to number five, which has probably the biggest overall addition to the mythology,
Mhm.
he's the one who kind of tells them about that as well, which is ultimately kind of interesting when you all think about the timeline of part five. How I guess
Mhm.
he like keeps that information from all the other characters later, but we can talk about that maybe in a little bit when we talk about like a brief synopsis of each movie or whatever.
Yeah. So again, rest in peace, Tony Todd. You will be missed.
Yes,
Uh,
for sure.
so I guess let's talk about the movies individually. I don't really want to give a whole plot synopsis beat for beat, or else we'll be here for another 2 hours.
Yeah, it's also what a silly franchise to do beat by beat plot synopsis for. You know?
Totally, totally. So, what I will do is tell you the name of the film, the year it came out, the main character who has the premonition, and the inciting incident that starts it all. How's that sound?
Yeah, that sounds good. That's a good. I
Okay.
think that's how most people think of them, right? Have you noticed that when you talk to people about the series and you go like, "What's your favorite Final Destination?" and someone might say like three, and they'll be like, "What was that one?" You're like, "Oh, it's the roller coaster one, right?" That's the way everyone
Exactly.
does it, I think. Yeah. So.
Exactly.
Yep.
So, Final Destination, the original from 2000. The main character's name is Alex. It's the plane crash one. You know,
Mhm.
that's all I'll say. It's the plane crash one. He has a premonition. He tells his brother and his friends, "Get off the plane, get off the plane," and then the plane explodes midair. On after right after takeoff too, by the way, in Paris. Final Destination 2 from 2003. This is a year after the first film. Kimberly is the main character. She has the premonition of probably the most iconic scene of this entire franchise, which is the gigantic pileup on Route 23, the one with everybody knows the log
Yes.
truck.
Yep.
This movie made people. This movie did for highways what Jaws did for the ocean. You know,
Yep. Yeah. I mean,
absolutely.
we talked earlier about how this franchise is just kind of known for making people like apprehensive about like, death and how close it is at all times in general. But like it is something special when a movie can change entire generations like outlook on something. And yeah, every time I'm on a highway and I'm by a log truck, you think of Final Destination 2, and
Yeah,
I know I'm not alone on that.
no, 100%. Final Destination 3, 2006. Wendy is the main character, played by the great Mary Elizabeth Winstead. She has a premonition that their roller coaster is going to go off the tracks, and it's quite extravagant. But that's again what Trev said. That's the one with the roller coaster.
Mhm.
The Final Destination in
Whoops.
2009. I know. This is around that time when you added a the, almost
Well,
like it's like the main thing or the end of something to a
yeah,
franchise. Yeah, I
they
don't
were
know.
selling this as like the last one. How much they believe that? You got to assume maybe they thought that was true, but the thing is they put this one in 3D, and so the budget or the box office went way up, and like so almost immediately like never mind. But I really feel like I don't know, just for my sake and like so it doesn't seem as annoying to me. I really wish they would like live, die, repeat this and just go
Mhm.
back and change the name of this one to Final Destination 4 because it's so dumb that this is called the Final Destination now.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
But Nick is our main character, has a premonition of a race car crash that sends debris into the stadium and the stands, and it completely collapses. It's quite extravagant. A lot of CGI in this one.
Yeah.
We'll get back to that.
Can I just quickly say before you go into Final Destination 5, Chris,
Sure.
by the way, when I was young, my family were huge race fans. Me, not so much, but I got taken to a lot of races when I was a
Sure.
kid. So I went to the Indy 500 every year, went to a bunch of like NASCAR and Indy races at MIS, Michigan International Speedway, and I was at a race at Michigan International Speedway when I was young, where a crash happened and a tire flew into the stands and killed someone, just as you see in this
Holy
movie.
shit.
So, and we talked about the randomness of death and how some of these things are very, very realistic. There you go.
It really makes you think. Like even I just said this one was really extravagant, and yeah, that happens.
Yep. Yep.
Wild, wild. Final Destination 5 from 2011. Sam is our main character. He has a premonition that a bridge will collapse. I believe it's the San Francisco one. Is that the one? That famous
Um,
bridge, or is it not?
I don't think it's
It says
no. I
it
don't.
says the North Bay Bridge. I don't know what that is in
Yeah, no.
America.
It's a much smaller bridge than that. Yeah, that'd be amazing if the San Francisco Bridge collapsed.
Well, now you said it.
The Golden Gate Bridge. They tell you, like he has the premonition, and then the camera pans over, and you see Magneto over there, and it's just this movie's taking place during X-Men: The Last Stand.
And then you see a bunch Caesar and his apes on the other side
Yeah, just
of the
everything all at
bridge too.
once. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, the big bridge just collapses. It's again quite extravagant, but there you go.
Mhm.
Those are the five movies. Tons of deaths and stuff happen in between. Nobody is safe, like I said. So, we thought it would be kind of fun to just name our favorite deaths from these films. I'm gonna veto. You can't say the opening,
Yeah, yeah. I want to like let's do this. Let's
which
so
which
before
I actually just made that rule for myself, and I picked an opening for one of them.
Well, no, like, let's do this. I agree.
Okay.
I made sure that I did not pick any opening deaths because obviously, like that log tree going through the car and just taking the cop's head off, or the log from the log truck, I should say, going through the car and taking that cop's head off is one of just the most like memorable, like visuals of the franchise.
Yeah.
But it's also like a fantasy, right, or a premonition.
Right.
But let's do this before we say our favorite deaths from each movie. What's your favorite opening disaster then of the whole franchise? Like, which do you? So we got the plane, we got the highway, we got the roller coaster, we got the NASCAR race, and we got the bridge collapse. Which one do you think just takes the cake?
Again, I think for the iconography of it and it just being so monumentally fucking cemented in everybody's brain, it's the car crash one, like the log truck one.
Yeah.
But I do have a sweet spot for the roller coaster because it stems from when that movie came out, my buddy rented it. Remember when you could rent DVDs there, Trev? And you would go buy
Another
them?
reason this franchise was as popular as it was, right? This was a
Yes.
the DVD boom era franchise. So
And what was so fun about the Final Destination 3 Blu-ray is it was like a choose your own adventure slash choose your own death
mhm.
watch. So me and my friend watched it and we kind of chose the deaths as it went. And during the roller coaster, you can kind of choose who lives or dies. So I have a soft spot and just how just absolutely insane the roller coaster gets. So I do have a soft spot for that. But the log truck, it's got to take the cake for me. So.
Yeah, I think the highway sequence is by far like the disaster sequence of the series. This is gonna. So this is you and I have been on such good terms during this entire podcast, Chris. And for those who like Chris and Trev conflict, let me just come in right now and say that roller coaster one is my least favorite of the whole series. I just think the roller coaster sequence, it's kind of plagued by some really bad CG. And I know the NASCAR race one is too, but the other thing is none of the deaths during the roller coaster thing seem like singularly like impressive to me. It's kind of just people falling off the roller coaster. So
And
I
splitting
think,
in half when they hit the rails.
yeah, but it's like they don't, I don't know. It doesn't like linger on the visual long enough. Oh my God. I know I sound like a psycho right now,
You do.
but
No, and as you usually do in every discussion of movies like this.
but yeah, so no, but Highway by far for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
of course, of course.
Yeah. So now we
Um,
can talk about our favorite deaths just in general through the series.
yeah, okay, starting with Final Destination from 2000. Trev, what is your favorite death?
I'm going to give an honorable mention to the girl getting hit by the bus, right? Because that's just
Mm.
like one of the most like surprising and funny and like parodied moments. Like so many movies parodied that afterwards. Scary Movie, of course, iconically parodied it. And it's just like a great sudden shock, and it's just so fast. And it's so I'll give an honorable mention to that one. But actually, my favorite death in Final Destination is when Sean William Scott, Stifler himself, gets his head cut in half on the train tracks, where it's like you feel like you think they're okay. They were just on a car that almost got hit by a train, but they push it off. And then the train just runs over a piece of metal, and the piece of metal, it like shoots at them and slices his head in half. Just a great, like that right there, right? That's right there seals the deal on what this series is all about. Oh, you narrowly escaped the obvious death, and then something totally random gets you instead. That's my favorite
Mhm.
one.
I agree.
Yeah,
Stifler's train head.
yeah.
It's funny. I picked that one because, um, funnily enough, we're talking about this franchise like it's near and dear to our heart. I will say this. The only two that I really quote unquote grew up on slash watched start to finish back in the day was number three and number five.
Mhm.
So that'll go into my rankings too. When we talk about the rankings, I might, kind of talk about that. But I realized when I did this quote unquote rewatch in the beginning of the year that I had never seen from start to finish this first movie.
Yeah.
I've always seen like clips. I know about it. Of course, it's in the cultural zeitgeist, everything. But I think when Stifler's head gets cut off, I screamed. It was like so shocking that it just really, really works. So love that one. Okay, Final Destination 2, not the log truck. What do
No.
you want? What do you want?
This one's tough. I think there's a lot of great ones in this, and I was going to do honorable mentions, but I would just keep going. So instead, I will just zoom in on my favorite one. And this is the one that it's like, I believe it's the first post, premonition disaster sequence death. And it is what I would just call the fire escape death, because this is the one that I think, as I said, this is the tonal shift, right? This is the sequel has to now establish what this franchise is going to be moving forward. And I think this death perfectly encapsulates it. If you remember this one, Chris, it's where the guy has recently won the lottery, but he's like a total like scum bum, and he's in his apartment. And as he's like making some food, all the stuff keeps happening that you think is going to be the thing, right? Like he puts his hand on the garbage disposal and he just
Yeah,
got a
yeah.
new watch, and the watch gets stuck, and the garbage disposal is maybe going to turn on. At the same time, a grease fire starts, and then he's trying to put the grease fire out, and he pushes it, and he accidentally sets the whole apartment on fire. And he's trying to like put it out, and his arm's stuck in the garbage disposal, and you know what's going to happen. And then he gets out, the apartment blows up. He gets to the fire escape, and he starts going down the fire escape. He escapes the explosion, falls off the fire escape. You're like, oh my god! He lands. The fire escape ladder comes down, almost hits him. Nope, he's okay. And then he slips on some ramen noodles, falls on his back, and the fire escape comes down and plunges into his eyeball. So great. The comic like sequence of events is just so funny, and like I said, that's the tone setter for what this franchise is going to be moving forward. So that's why it's my favorite.
Yeah, you couldn't have said it better than that. That
Yeah.
is the best one from the second
Yeah.
movie. I also like a little simplicity too, so I like the elevator one.
Yeah.
Just because I just love that. That again created a fear among society. Don't reach through an elevator. Um, but yes, no, that one is the best one. 100%.
Well,
The
that's why I
fire
also
escape
like
death.
on a simplicity sense, I also like the airbag one in part two a lot, where
Oh
again it's just
yes.
like, oh, you think you got out of this thing, and then just like them just like ramming the saw in to cut her out and setting the airbag off and it plunging her head back into the pipe. Oh man,
Yeah, it's
good
great.
stuff.
It's great. Okay, Final Destination 3, your favorite death.
This one is a little tougher because again, I didn't know if there was like too many that I considered like very iconic in this, but the one that I think is great again because there's just a really good misdirect is I really like the weight machine death in this one because I
Mm.
love that the entire time you were just convinced it's going to have to do with those two swords. Like for some reason, this gym has two like scimitar swords hanging above like the weight machine, and they're
Yeah.
rattling. The screws are coming out, and they do end up falling, but they don't hit him. And this guy's just like so cocky, and he's like, "Yeah, see, I beat death. I'm so great." And then the weight machine itself comes down, crushes his head. And hey, from our Eric Matthews talk in the Saw franchise, I love a good crushed head. Who doesn't? So the weight machine one would be my favorite here.
I'm gonna clip that out and play that everywhere. Like a good crushed head. Trevor Snyder. Okay. The third one, I love the tanning bed.
Okay,
And for
yeah.
two reasons, well, maybe three, because two reasons, we get some nudity in that one. So we get
Hmm.
that. And then I also like just like the domino effect of that one
Yeah.
playing out like a mousetrap. I love that. But I'll say the one that makes me laugh every single time is when that car engine flies through and goes in the back of that guy's head and just like rips him up
Yeah.
after the
Yeah.
car. That makes me laugh every time because again, it's setting other things up. But when that happens and the fucking engine flies right through, and it's in front of like a drive-through or something, right? If I remember correctly.
It is, yeah. He's in
Um,
the drive-through lane, yeah. And also he's like
yes,
one of the like worst, dumbest characters in the entire franchise.
yes, yes.
Frankie
So
Cheeks, I believe is his name. Yes.
is it really?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh
He's
wow.
the
Okay.
worst. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I love the car engine. That's my number one.
Okay.
The Final Destination slash Final Destination 4. What is your favorite death?
So you're gonna think this is a cheat, but it's not because I'm gonna go with like something that happens immediately after the premonition. So this one is the NASCAR sequence, and everyone gets like slaughtered in the NASCAR race in the car crash, but then they escape. But then as soon as they escape, right, they're outside. You believe like, okay, this is our group of characters who survived. We're gonna watch, and then just immediately a tire comes flying out of the race arena, like out of the stadium, and just demolishes the girlfriend of the mechanic character, like takes her head and shoulder right off. And I believe that's like the moment that like the logo for the movie comes up. And like yeah, so like, even though it's like immediately after, I think that's the great thing because that was a clever misdirect, right? You're like, okay, here's our surviving characters. I guess it'll probably be about 5 or so minutes before one of them dies. Nope, we're taking one out right now, and it's like a great, glorious, gory death. So that would be my favorite one here.
Yeah, that's a great choice.
Yeah,
Um, I like the complexity and almost silly Saw like stuff of the eye laser. It
yeah,
reminds me of Saw, so I really like that. But I'm gonna give it up to another simple one. The pool intestine colon
yeah.
suck.
That would be my honorable mention. Yeah,
Because that one just makes me laugh.
yeah.
And it is like it is horrifying, but it's more about the thought of it. You know what I mean?
There's like an infamous Chuck Palahniuk short story where that happens, and it's like the story that he would apparently whenever he would read that story at book signings at bookstores and libraries, people would like pass out as he read it. And he's always said that that's based on like a true story. I don't know how apocryphal that is, but like as far as I know, that might have actually happened to someone. Like the idea of like having your intestines sucked out from the pool drain. I don't know, who knows, but he says it is. If nothing else, it ended up in this movie, and yeah, it's pretty funny.
Yeah, yeah. Final Destination 5. Your favorite death.
I have a feeling we're going to be on the same page here again, but who knows? My favorite of this one is by far the gymnastics death, because again, I just think the lead up to this one is so brilliant. This is probably the high watermark of the entire franchise in terms of getting an audience on the edge of their seat and nervous and like chewing their fingernails waiting for the death, because there's just so many pieces, right? You're seeing the frayed cord for the fan going into the puddle of water. You're seeing the screw fall on the balance beam, and then the excellent shots of the gymnast's feet just dancing back and forth by the screw, and you're just waiting for her to step on it. And then the screw is coming loose on the balance beams or on the like the bars itself, and so you're thinking that's going to break. And then the fact that it builds all that up, and it keeps like diffusing those situations. You're like, oh my god, what was it going to be? And then it just ends up she gets some dust blown in her face and falls the wrong way and like breaks in half. It's such a funny like finale to that, and it's also just so gruesome and just like one of the like funniest and but grossest visuals. That's my favorite one by far.
That is my pick as well.
Yeah.
For all the reasons you just said,
Yep.
but also just has an anecdotal reason for
Yeah.
mine.
Yeah. I knew this. Yeah.
Yeah, my ex-girlfriend was a cheerleader, a professional cheerleader. So I watched her do tumbles and all this other shit, for many, many years. I used to watch her. And I remember she was into these movies, so we went to go see that movie in 2011. And we saw this one in theaters. And when that happened, I was so fucking grossed out and so like frightened, but also it is hilarious, but also just like, oh my God, because of like the idea that I saw my girlfriend at the time potentially scorpioning like that.
Hmm.
And that is might be for me one of the most iconic deaths too. I think about that one on the regular, especially there's a I don't know if it's a fad, but uh, there's a lot of videos on the internet of people scorpioning, of doing that exact like tumble, but they land and they kind of go over and over like their feet above their head, and every single time I think they're gonna break in half.
Yeah.
So, uh, great death.
Yes.
Cannot agree more with that.
Yeah.
Great. We got our best favorite deaths out of the way here. I think we should immediately jump into our ranking of the franchise proper. So if you don't mind, Trev, I'll just kind of rattle off my ranking real quick, and then
Sure.
we'll just jump to you. Okay? Because
Yeah.
I really want to get to our thought experiment of our our own Final Destination deaths written for each other. So, okay.
Uh-huh.
All right. So again, I rewatched slash watched a couple of these for the first time, actually, front to back, this past March. So I'm going to say my favorite of the franchise is the original Final Destination.
Okay.
Um, I just felt that this one was quite frightful. Like
Hmm.
I found myself squirming, but also just very engaged, and very nervous. Obviously, I know certain set pieces from like just cultural zeitgeist, but watching the movie from start to finish, I was just so in. I love these characters. I think Devon Sawa is awesome as
Yeah.
Alex. He really leads you through the journey and the mythology and trying to fight death. So I really like that. And I just thought it was really masterful stuff. I actually felt like James Wong very much was like a master of horror in that way. I felt
Hmm.
like he should be talked about more because of that first movie. So, first movie, my favorite. The second movie, this is more this you're going to disagree with this, but I really love Final Destination 3.
Hmm.
And I would say that this is my quote unquote Final Destination movie. Just kind of perfectly synced up with my high school graduation. The anecdote of with me and my buddy renting the DVD, and also my first watch of Mary Elizabeth Winstead, which I think really brought another level of acting to the franchise. I thought she was just excellent, and I really liked watching her. And also James Wong coming back to direct the franchise, which was nice to see. My number three is Final Destination 5, the one with the gymnast.
Hmm.
Um, this is the one that I said what makes a good Final Destination movie, by the way.
Yeah.
This is the one that I said that. It kind of comes back to basics on this, and I really like, which I'm sure you're going to talk about more, like this murder addition to Death's
Yes.
design. I think it's cool that you can maybe beat Death if you kill somebody else
Yeah.
who's not destined to die. So I really like that. And then again, the gymnast death is just, an all-timer. My fourth favorite is Final Destination 2. The crash scene is incredible in the beginning, and I just liked that the attempt to connect this one with the second one and more rules behind Death's design. It's clunky, but it works. Um, and I just think this one comes down to the funnier path. You know what I mean? Like you said before, this one was the one right out the gate that it said, "Hey, we're gonna have some fun as well. We're gonna cast kooky characters, and it's a lot brighter too. It's kind of a colorful movie in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
So I found myself laughing at this one more than being fearful, which is fine. Again, that's not a knock on the movie. I think all these four that I've talked about are very good to great. The only one I think sucks balls is the next one, is The Final Destination. This one sucks. I'm just not a fan of this one. I skipped this one when it was released, and I see why I did. It doesn't have the precision in building the sense of dread like the other ones do. And I just, at least in number two, that they had kooky characters, but in this one, I just found everybody really, really, really boring, and it's really ugly looking. There's so much CGI that it's just really distracting, and I don't know. This one's just a bomb. This one's just like a kind of a waste of time, in my opinion. I just don't like this one. And the only thing I will say I do like is one of the co-stars, Chantel Van Santen, is in it. She stars in For All Mankind on Apple TV Plus. I love that show, so it was nice seeing her. She is quite attractive as well. But yeah, no, that one not a huge fan. So, Trev, what's the ranking for you?
Wow, our lists are actually very, very different, Chris, except for one. There's only one movie that's in the same spot. You can probably guess which one that is. But other than that, yeah. So my favorite is Part Five, Final Destination Five, and
Nice.
it's just so weird, right? This is not supposed to happen. It's very, very rare that horror franchises, the fifth entry is as good as this one. In fact, I was looking at other horror franchises, and almost always Part Fives are like total dog shit, right? And the
Hmm.
fact that this was such a comeback after Part Four, and I remember even that being the vibe of this one when it came out, where like even like the like a lot of critics were like, "Oh my God, what a return to form! This is like such a thank you after like the bummer that Part Four was." You mentioned that addition to the mythology. That's a big part of it, right? Like, how do you keep this franchise fresh after four entries? This new idea that, oh, if you murder someone, you inherit their remaining days. Right. And that gets you out of like the death cycle. What a great addition. I really hope that's continued in Bloodlines. I hope it's a permanent part moving forward because it adds in an additional now there's a human threat as well, right? In
Hmm.
the finale of this, we've got our characters also being stalked by, someone who wants to murder them and as well as death. So that just adds like an additional element to it. And also, I don't want to give it away, but this movie has one of the all-time like great twist endings of a horror movie. A lot of these kind of try and end on like a little surprising last little button, but the twist of this one was just so effective. I can just tell you, I saw this opening night in the theater. And the moment the audience started to realize what was happening with that twist ending, you could just feel the energy like go through like the crowd, and then just like once it was like confirmed, like it was like just one of those great theater experiences where everyone realized how well the movie had like played them. And
Yeah.
I don't, like I said, I don't want to spoil it if anyone hasn't seen it, but it's just I can't believe that the fifth movie on, it was like an entirely new creative team this time, so maybe that's part of it. But to come up with that great of a twist and just a cool new addition to the mythology, hats off to Final Destination 5.
Yep.
My number two is Final Destination 2. Like I said, I like the goofier side of this franchise. So I like that this was the kind of like, let's make a statement about what this franchise is moving forward. I think David Ellis, I know he also directed Part 4. We'll talk about that in a minute. But in general, David R. Ellis, I think is like a kind of a good, like, unfortunately, he's the late David R. Ellis. We lost him, but he was a good, like, kind of like B movie, like director, right? He did Cellular, which is a movie I quite like, and Snakes in a Plane, which I'm a huge defender of. I just think he has a good hand of knowing like what an effective B movie is, and that's what Final Destination 2 is, right? It's just a really good B movie. But like you said, what I do like is I like the continuation of Ali Larter's character and the way this kind of
Yeah.
effectively buttresses the two movies up against each other. So yeah, I think this one's a lot of fun, and I do like the goofiness. My number three would be number one. As you said, this is the one that takes the concept the most seriously. Not to say there's no humor, but it's taking it more seriously. And Devon Sawa is just so effective in the lead role, like you said. I mean, Devon Sawa is an actor I still continue to like to this day. Love his multiple roles on Chucky. I love that he's like such a enthusiastic cheerleader for the horror franchise as well, even today, and that he's like, so like, on social media, he still will like, go back and even talk about like this movie and like how much he loves like, this franchise and getting to be a part of it. So yeah, it's the one that started it all. Great concept. That's my number three. My number four would be part three. I like this one, and in particular, I like you said, Mary Elizabeth Winstead is maybe the best lead performance of the entire franchise.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'll give it that. Like, right, she's just so likable, you can't help but kind of get into the movie. I just kind of felt like to me the deaths in this one were a little lackluster compared to the other ones that topped it on my list. So that's kind of like my only like real critique of this one. I feel like this one takes a little bit to get going. If my memory is serving too, I feel like a lot of the really good stuff is in like the last 20 minutes. And then yeah, just like you, my last one and the only one I really just don't like is the Final Destination. This one is a bummer. This one just feels like, I don't know. It's like they came up with the 3D concept. They knew they're on their way out and they were like barely even trying, right? It's like, it's the characters in this one are just so ridiculous and so bad. And I think even in the credits, they're like listed as like racist and MILF. It's like they just weren't even trying. It's like the dialogue is so cringe. This one's pretty tough to watch. And even though part five was in 3D as well, this is the one where when you watch it in 2D, the 3D like deaths just look so stupid because they're just all predicated on something popping out at you, and it just looks really bad. Though I will say, you mentioned the actress that you thought was so hot, and she was kind of like a crush of yours that was in this. I have that as well. The aforementioned MILF is played by Krista Allen, who to me is like one of the all-time hotties. And when I was growing up, she starred in a Cinemax or Skinemax series called Emmanuel in Space. That was a very, very important series for young Trev. So I was very, very excited to see her in this. But other than that, The Final Destination is a big stinkeroo. So yeah.
Krista Allen has made it into many of my Maxim magazines that I had.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's funny because I think I mention this every success to series, which, is a testament to why these franchises work and they continue to be good to great to financially successful. And every time we do a ranking, our rankings are all over the place.
Yeah.
We maybe have one or two that are in the exact same spot, but really it just like depends. And it's I think that's so fun about stuff like this. Like, if you rank like, the first three Star Wars movies, and I'm talking about like 4, 5, and 6, typically speaking, I know what everybody's going to say is their favorite one, right? But like something like a franchise, like a Final Destination, like a Saw, like an Underworld, these movies that are made for, I don't want to say shoestring budgets, but, in contextually, they're pretty small budgets.
Yeah.
And they go on to be highly profitable. It's fun that these movies just have such a varied audience and critical/fan, accolades.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think probably to a T, I think almost every Final Destination fan would agree that part four is the worst one. That does seem to be the general consensus. But beyond that, I think you're absolutely right that then the other four, how they would fall is entirely based on maybe when you saw them or like what disaster you like the most, or maybe just what your favorite death scenes are. And honestly, if someone told me if any of the other four were their favorite, I'd be like, yep, okay, checks out. If anyone told me the Final Destination was their favorite, I'd say, get out of my face. That's the only like caveat. But yeah, it's a very, very consistent franchise. And here, let's even just say this. Let's give the devil his due. The thing that proves how consistent of a franchise it is and how fun of a franchise is you and I are saying, obviously, the Final Destination is the worst one. It's like the bottom tier. Is it still watchable? Yes, it is, right? Because it's still got goofy death scenes and it's still short, and they're like the terribleness of that one makes it kind of like sickly enjoyable to watch to a certain degree. So it's not like there's a completely unwatchable movie in this franchise, and I'm looking forward and I'm excited to see where it goes, because I really thought after they took such a long break after part five, I worried that this franchise was done, and I'm definitely excited that it's coming back next year with Bloodlines.
Yeah.
And it's actually going to star an actress I like, Brec Bessinger, who is she starred in Stargirl, one of the good CW DC like superhero shows. So and like I said, get to see Tony Todd one more time. So I'm definitely pulling for that movie. I'd love to see this franchise start up again.
Yeah, 14 years later. That's crazy. That's wild. Yeah. But it reminds me of like when we did the Saw success to series. Saw 10 was coming out. And how excited we were, and how awesome that movie was. I think I was a little bit more positive than you, but I think you were still positive. You know what I mean? Like it was still, it was still like just it was just great to be back. Okay. Trev, the moment has come. Would you like to know how death will get you?
I guess. Yeah, lay it on me.
Okay. Okay, so Trev floated this idea a few weeks ago, I think, maybe even longer,
Hmm.
that we should write for each other death's design and what would happen to us. And it was funny because today, roughly 3 to 4 hours before we recorded, it came back to me, and I was like, "Holy shit, I got to write that thing." And I confirmed with you that I didn't just dream it, and it wasn't just a premonition of mine that we actually were going to do this. So I went to my office and I put pen to paper. And Trev, let me tell you a story of how you're going
Okay.
to die. Okay. Picture Trev after a long day of teaching. You're pretty sleepy. After what I can only assume is a day of never ending monologues without me there to stop you. You're driving home, winding down with the newest Poppy album blasting into your car.
Hmm.
You also have a fresh hot coffee in your teacher's thermos with a lid that just won't fit on quite properly. At the same time you're driving home, another middle aged male nerd, and definitely not a young hot chick, is walking outside listening to an episode of the Kaiju Transmissions podcast where you're guested on. AirPods blasting, the dulcet tones of your voice into his ears, blissfully unaware of what surrounds him. He just left the store with a jerry can full of oil for his lawnmower. He also has very loosely tied shoelaces. So you're driving, hot coffee bubbling, stereo amplified. The man is walking, oil in hand, laces loose, AirPods blasting. Now, the definitely not hot chick Kaiju Transmissions listener is about to come up to this crosswalk by your house, where you're also approaching. You go to take a sip of the precarious beverage. The man approaches the corner. The lid comes loose. You burn your mouth. The man crosses the street. He trips on his shoes. The fresh oil spills on the road. You regain your balance. You swerve left. You swerve right. Oh my God, are you going to hit him? No. You miss the dork, much to everyone's chagrin. So you get home around the corner, your heart racing, your lips ablaze, your shirt ruined. So you take a little longer to change and freshen up before forcing a skin flick horror movie on your wife for the seventh time in 3 weeks. The crosswalk man is now home as well, himself narrowly escaping death. But he has chores to do. He's got to mow that lawn. Trev's now setting up the movie for him and his wife. But wait, he forgot to log his last 3 films on Letterboxd. Sorry, Liz, you gotta wait. Trev goes to type out his novel long entries, and with each keystroke, feeling he's deserving of a Pulitzer Prize, waxing poetic of all the ways he could have rewrote these films for ultimate cinephile filleting. In the distance, a lawnmower starts up, faintly, but close enough to distract Trev's masterful wordplay. Trev is delayed in his office with his full-sized window. He can't get his thoughts out without all the racket happening. Cut back to the lawnmower man, still rattled by the close encounter of the death kind. He forgot to tie his shoes properly once again, inching closer and closer to getting snagged on the blades of death. And then bam! The shoelace gets snagged. The man falls over. Trev runs to the window to yell for the lawnmower to stop. The man's leg gets ripped off at the shin and thrown in the distance. Trev opens the window to scream as a bloody shin-filled shoe rockets into Trev's face, exploding his head. Cut to the computer screen, where Trev was about to hit submit on his review, only to see his own blood rain down upon the laptop and his words to never be read ever again. There you go.
It's scary how much that checks out. You still there?
Yeah, I'm there. I'm laughing. I'm laughing. Man.
Yeah, I could see going that way, honestly. And you know what? I welcome it. The real question is, what stupid piece of shit movie was I logging on Letterboxd at the time? That's the
Well, one of the skin flicks, maybe. I don't know. I'm not sure.
yeah. Probably some obscure like 70s Italian movie that you were gonna make fun of me for watching in the first place.
Probably that Emmanuel movie that you just talked about. So yeah, you've said many things this episode.
Ooh,
that
are those
have
on
worked.
Letterboxd? I wonder.
All right. Okay. There you go.
All right. All right. Well, Chris, let me give you a scenario here, right? Good news, Chris. It's the Stanley Cup Finals, and your beloved Edmonton Oilers are in the Stanley Cup Finals once again. You, your brother, and some friends are at Rogers Place to watch Game 7. Yes, it's come to Game 7, but you're hopeful. This is finally going to be the year where the Oilers get the cup. Amazingly, you've got like really good seats. You're in the fifth row from the ice. So close. And so close, but Oddly enough, even though you're that close, you don't seem to notice that as the gameplay goes on, every time the players are getting smashed into the glass panel in front of your section, the glass panel just keeps cracking just a little bit. There's a crack just forming on the bottom, and it keeps growing and growing and growing. Obviously, you also would notice that one bowl above you, as you know, there's that line of video screens that runs around the arena. One of the people sitting in the row right behind that video screen has accidentally knocked over their Molson. And because no franchise has ever had more sequences of liquids falling into electronics and shorting them out, the Molson is starting to drip right into that video wall. And the video wall is starting to sputter just a little bit. Meanwhile, you send one of your friends to go get a bunch of poutine for the whole row to celebrate what you're sure is about to be, the big game winner and getting to see your favorite team win the cup. And as your friend goes and gets the poutine and returns, that sputtering scoreboard, the electronic video screen, suddenly explodes, raining down sparks on the entire crowd, but thankfully far enough behind that it doesn't affect you. It does affect the entire arena, though, because everyone is shocked by this explosion, including Connor McDavid, who is so shocked that he accidentally fires the puck not at the opponent's net, but right at that same glass panel in front of your section. And because that crack is already formed, the puck shatters through the glass panel and continues going and hits your friend right in the head as he's coming down the steps with the poutine, which causes him to fall and spill the piping hot poutine right onto your head. And suddenly your face is just like melting off in a combination of like molten hot gravy and cheese curds. And you stand up screaming and slip on your own Molson, because I assume that's the beer that everyone is drinking in this arena. And as you're screaming and you slip on the Molson, you go down those 5 rows and fall onto the ice, going through the same glass panel that's just shattered. So now you're laying on the ice, your head's still steaming from the poutine, covered in the glass shards that were left behind from the shattered panel. And you think, oh my God, this is horrible, but I might just survive it. Except unfortunately, a player skates up right at that moment and decapitates you. And your head, thankfully, though, goes rolling into the net. And the goal judges say, you know what? We'll allow it. And the lights go off and everyone cheers. But yeah, that's what I came up with. Sorry to Clint Malarchuk you there a little bit, but I wanted to give you an appropriately Canadian death.
Wow, thank you.
Yes.
I quite like, as long as my my head goal won the cup, that's okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think would have to, right? Like, let's
Yeah.
just because as we said, the series sometimes can allow you to still go out on a high and have some fun. So
Yeah. Put my head on the cup as they skated around, you know?
yeah. Mhm.
Oh man, that was good. It's so funny because I was thinking of one that came to me that I thought maybe you'd kill me. I think death almost would have got me at the Universal Studios Jurassic Park ride. I almost thought you were gonna do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I don't want to have to pay for the rights to Jurassic Park.
No, that's fair. Just the Oilers you can get. Well, we're a pretty successful team now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Man, that was fun. That was
Yeah.
good. Listeners, I hope you enjoyed our success to series Final Destination franchise conversation. Um, these are always fun for us to do. It's nice to just shoot the shit and
Yeah.
talk with my friend about something that we, actually like, and we don't have to I don't want to say suffer through, but this year was for many reasons, a lot was going on, and it's nice to celebrate something versus talk so pessimistically about movies or the industry or the world.
Yeah, and I mean, if look, our larger shows obviously failure to franchise. As we said, success to series is about discussing what did these franchises do that the other ones didn't. So if all the failed movies we've talked about all year can take a lesson from this, it's just on your first go out, come up with a very, very incredible, singularly amazing, unique idea that just can't be replicated, and there you go. You'll actually get a franchise. So
yeah, simple stuff.
Yeah, should be easy, folks.
Yeah, pay me tens of millions, I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Next episode, we're going back to failure to franchise. We're going to be doing Trev and Christmas, where we gifted each other some movies. So I gifted Trev. What did I give you? Oh, I gave you Monster Trucks from 2016, and Trev gifted me Power Rangers from 2017. So hopefully we continue the positivity. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. Follow along at F2F Pod. That's at F2, the number 2F Pod on all the socials. Like us there, like us everywhere. Rate, review, whatever you do. A star rating would be great. And just join the tribe and hit that subscribe. And let's open some gifts and celebrate Christmas together on Failure to Franchise.
Why are you following us? Who are you? What are you doing?
My job.
What's happening to us?
What makes you think I know anything?
You warned us. At the memorial service, you said death didn't like to be cheated.
It's just that I've seen this before. You changed things on that bridge. It's a wrinkle in reality. And that wrinkle is you.
Are you saying that we can't stop this?
You're not supposed to be here. You shorted death. So you let death have somebody else in your place, and then you take their spot in the realm of the living, all the days and years that they've yet to live. And they take your place in death. Then the book's about.